Hello there. Sorry, until I get ready, and welcome to this second episode. If you're not listening in now, then this is me from the past saying hello to you from the future. As you wouldn't be hearing it if you're not listening to it otherwise. So, today's argument is scraplets and Autobot Blaster, both featured in this image. I don't want to talk only about how both these arguments have been taken recently by IDW. I want to look at them in their entirety and how they've been seen in Transformers. And I suppose it's a double argument. From my point of view, both sort of mesh into each other. But scraplets, yeah, what are scraplets? So this is the TF Wiki page, and it talks about the Marvel interpretation of scraplets, and then it shows how different cartoons or different cartoons or comics or media or interpretations of Transformers have what take they've given on the notion of scraplets. You can see one of the most recent takes here on the Prime cartoon. Let me see if I can click the image. Anyways, a couple more. There it was sort of. And IDW, who's recently done a take on them. But I think we should start with the Marvel. So, what are scraplets? I guess I can give you the wiki description. Scraplets are alleged to be the deadliest disease known to mechanical life forms in the entire galaxy. It's a complicated form of alien parasite which lives solely to eat, reproduce, and eat some more. Okay, well, basically they were introduced to the Transformers fandom with this episode, which is rather cool episode because it sees some robots coming from Cybertron which weren't on Earth and were unaware of what Prime and Megatron were doing on Earth until quite recently. And there's different factions of Decepticons and Autobots, and in this we're shown, while previously in Blaster's story with Scrounge, which we'll get into, we're introduced to Straxus as a leader of Decepticons. In this episode we're also shown Ratbat as another leader of the Decepticons. And they sort of send stuff to Earth, and one of these ships is infected by scraplets. And scraplets in this take is very much sort of screws and bolts and things like so, and they turn into, let's see if I can find them, there you go, there. No. Some more scraplets. Any scraplets there? Oh, this is the page that explains them. So they're just sort of like live in space, like clouds, until they find something mechanical to eat, which is a bit weird. But here, maybe we can have a better look at them in the meantime. And they sort of like jump into the robot and start eating him a bit, like almost as if it's rust. We sort of had a similar interpretation to this in the Sunbow cartoon with the rust disease. So you see the robots are just getting worse and worse off as the disease. There you go, they sort of screw into you and jump into you. And there's a scraplet, a scale comparison for a scraplet, big as a hand. There you are. He's bulked. I'll leave it on this image. And now recently, after Prime, IDW has also brought in scraplets into their lore, and we'll look at them. Of course, since the start, we're going to have to mention this as well. I suppose scraplets have this ability to sort of unite into one big badass scraplet, which is also picked up by IDW. We should just go and see what happens in the IDW scraplet story. So these are scraplets in the IDW universe. Compared to the Prime scraplets we've seen, they sort of are a bit more true to the original media. They've lost this bolts and screws look, and they're just basically a maxi combiner. If you can see on the pic in the top right, it's a mixture between sort of friable and then it becomes hard metal. But they're keeping this color sort of that we've established so far, which is this pinkish little there. Now, in the IDW lore, they actually call them red scraplets, which sort of implies that there's other scraplets around, and that the red scraplets are even more voracious. Is this hinting at the Marvel scraplets? I'm not sure. So is it saying that those scraplets were very virulent among the scraplets you can find? Does it? I don't think it says much in terms of that. I'm very happy that they actually brought scraplets into the IDW universe. The way they did it, I'm not going to go into the Lost Light story for spoilers and things, but I like that they're finally part of the IDW universe, and that they have a modern take on it that is not the Prime take, which I didn't particularly enjoy or appreciate or like. But this argument, I think, is more than dead, and it brings us to Autobot Blaster, which is how the scraplets are actually introduced to the Transformers lore in the Marvel episode, because he's the guy with Bumblebee that sort of features in that episode. And but Blaster is sort of a new Autobot that's been introduced in the Marvel comics at this point in the series. And I think his character has had an unfinished cycle in his story. And every media, from Sunbow to Marvel to IDW, has given a different take on him. But there's a lot of lost potential in him, as he was supposed to sort of be a leader. He was opposing Grimlock in his Autobot tyranny, and he seemed to be the one with an interest to be protecting the humans and carrying on Optimus Prime's legacy in terms of that. But everything is then sort of lost when the Marvel series finishes with the Starscream event. There's a small fight between Autobot and Grimlock that's supposed to happen for the leadership on the moon, and then it doesn't. And then all of that is lost because the threads of the story go elsewhere, and Blaster's leadership potential is never addressed again in the Marvel comics. Just before we go on, the Marvel take on Blaster is pretty much a war veteran who's sour about having lost a friend, which we see here featured. And this episode was particularly grimdark. If you can see these images, it doesn't portray a particularly ideal or utopic Cybertron, on the contrary. And this is the Autobot unit, led by Perceptor, which is in contrast with Blaster, which at this point of the story sort of is a bit of the renegade solo 80s prototype hero. Lone Wolf, whatever, which is very different from the take which we're given in the cartoon.
Optimus Prime, do you read me?
Sort of
The
like
Decepticons are blitzing Autobot City. We're really taking a pounding. Don't know how much longer we can hold out.
There you go.
Soundwave, jam that transmission.
And which this is totally different eventually from what take IDW gave to Blaster, which was to make him sort of a bit sour, because of and the story behind this was his death and betrayal by part of an Autobot, and I'm not going to ruin the story for you. If you want to read it and you haven't, but that just basically constitutes the entirety of the persona of Blaster in the IDW comics. He isn't approached with much depth in any other comic afterwards, and not before. So he's sort of completely defined by this issue. We see him in the Lost Light, and eventually he's one of the Autobots that joins with Getaway. So he's sort of sour against Megatron in this. I suppose that says something about him as well. But this is mostly what we have on his persona in the IDW comics, and what comes out is that he was sort of a very positive guy before, and after this he's just very sour, which is just basically a different take on the Marvel take on the character, but without the leadership part that we had in the Marvel era. So and I think we've seen, I mean, when we're talking now about Bumblebee taking especially with Rid and maybe now Cyberverse, taking the guises of the persona of Hot Rod, as in the young new leader, enthusiastic leader, which and his voyage to leadership, compared to Bumblebee, which is supposed to be the sort of, you know, helper, eternal helper of Optimus Prime. And now Bumblebee is taking Hot Rod's role, so Hot Rod is being omitted as much as possible from the lore in the moment, and he's been given this Rodimus Unicronus, I don't even remember this name, this bad black Rodimus, which sort of makes it impossible for him to, and so he's been carrying the dark side of the Matrix in, I'm not sure, I've seen him both in Machinima and in Earth Wars, but I didn't follow the storyline on Earth Wars, and I can't remember it properly when it goes to Machinima, but he's sort of, in Machinima he's supposed to be a vector of Unicron through a dark matrix or something like that, and so this pretty much puts him in a place where in the future it's going to be hard to be portraying him as the ideal matrix carrier, which is a take he's been having also in the IDW universe, and which has been sort of started in Machinima, but then, as you see, has been cut off for reasons that are probably tied to other parts of the franchise, Bumblebee specifically, and so on. But what this leaves us with is a Blaster that in none of these continuities, even the continuity where he was a cool guy, none of these continuities have reached their conclusion, and he's never sort of reached his potential. So my take is, it would be nice to see Blaster at some point not become a leader, but at least deal with the sort of thread and storyline and persona that he was given in the Marvel run. So let me know what you think. I'm going to include all of the Straxus episodes in my playlist, mostly because I feel they complement Grindcore. They give this idea of an era where during the war the Decepticons are just being more and more not careless, brutal, I suppose. And it gives also this idea of different leaderships around on the planet or in different periods. So, and I like both Ratbat's position and Straxus's, and obviously the whole representation of Tarn, which I've also touched in the IDW episode of Megatron Origins as a gladiator. So I also want to give an in-depth description of this part of Cybertron and what goes on it. Now you've seen a couple of images as we've talked. The robots, the poor robots asking for energon in the streets, and the smelting pits, and the gladiators, and so on. So, and it's continued to receive a lot of attention in Transformers as well, so it's worth exploring its origins. So that's all I have for today, I suppose. If you enjoyed it, if you have something to say on the argument, don't be afraid, leave a comment, subscribe, and I